r/AskReddit. Serious, what are some cryptid/ghost/unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now this didn't alarm us, since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie clichés, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment wondering what we should do, before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder, but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond. Please respond," repeated in my head. But the silence continued. Now at this point I'm freaking out, and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mum, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her, or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home, as well as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time as we still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. This isn't a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was a little kid, so I've only heard this story from my grandma, who likes to tell me things like these when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her 3 younger siblings. One of them was a baby and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling 3 hyper kids and 1 baby on an airplane isn't that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the 2 youngest, while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on my mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining, and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forget it all. Just as my grandma's about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder, and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she'd like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays I don't think people would be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly reads, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sisters coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she'd ever had since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she's really excited to introduce this man she befriended on the flight to my grandpa and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows. 10 minutes went by. Then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma, worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all the people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response. "Sorry, ma'am, there's no man's name on this list." To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. I got home from school one day and decided to play a game on my computer. During intermission in the game, I would talk in a group chat with a couple of my friends. We were telling jokes and making each other laugh until I needed to use the restroom. I told them I would be right back and left my phone on the desk and didn't turn it off. When I returned, I noticed that some of the letters were being pressed, even though no one was in the room with me. It wasn't a word that was typed, but random letters with the backquote symbol spacing them out. To me, it didn't mean anything, so I asked my friends if they thought it meant something, but they were startled by it and didn't know what it meant either. I thought it was strange, but decided to ignore it. Later that night, when I decided to go to bed, I turned off my lamp and got under the sheets. My cat, Portia, was by me sound asleep. A few moments later, I heard what sounded like footsteps slowly creepy through the hallway to my bedroom. Suddenly, they stopped right outside my doorway. I glanced up and expected to see my brother, but no one was in sight. From her dead sleep, Portia bolted up, stood at the end of my bed, and stared into the hallway. I was confused, since she had never done that before. I tried to get her back to her normal spot on my bed, but she wouldn't budge. I even put my hand in front of her face, but she kept trying to peer over it. She eventually sat back down and went to bed. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences like that, and I still wonder if there was something trying to contact me that night. Unexplained story here. So I was walking home from college one afternoon. It's about a 2-mile walk between home and college. I'm on the outskirts of the town center and entering a busy neighborhood, and everything seems normal until I start getting a creepy feeling like I was being watched or something. So I look around, and what do I find? Literally every person looking at me and watching me as I go past them. Even the people driving were looking at me as they went past. Like, there was this one guy who was turning the corner to come onto the road I was about to cross, and he was legit leaning over in his seat, staring at me as he drive around this corner. Happened for the entire way home, but hasn't happened since. Was super freaked out. Didn't tell my family or friends cause they would think I'm crazy. And y'all out there saying this world ain't a simulation. It's quite short. I chose a stall next to a stall that was used by someone with brown leather shoes. I had no toilet paper, so after some time I asked the guy next to me if he can send me a few. He moved his foot and handed it. His hand looked weirdly pale blue and was cold to the touch. I took the tissues and finished up and left the stall quickly. I was shocked to see that the stall next to me was empty. All that was there was a pair of brown leather shoes. I swear I have no explanation. I still think it was just a prank or something, but I just don't know how. It was a rainy winter morning. My father and I were pulling out of the driveway headed to school. We both saw a glimpse of a girl in a white dress, barefoot, blonde, maybe 5 years old, run around the corner of our home and out of sight. We both looked at each other and acknowledged that we witnessed the same thing. He got out of the car and ran around the house to look for her. When he came back, he said he couldn't find anyone but called my mom to let her know that a little kid might be running around the yard. We thought it was weird, but not much was said of it, and there weren't any missing kids in the area. A few months later we were remodeling our basement and found a photo album hidden behind the drywall. It was full of photos of a little girl with blonde hair in a white dress. The photo album was from 1922. The family that originally lived in the house died of TB. Astronaut Deke Slayton's red race plane was seen flying at John Wayne Airport during curfew. where aircraft were not allowed to take off before 7 am or 8 am depending on the day. Thanks a lot people who make noise complaints. GRRRRR. The airport's official sent a letter about the noise to Deke's home, and it was received by his very confused widow. Apparently, Deke had died many hours ago, and his race plane had been in a museum for years. This article has more details about the incident, as well as some others. I don't really believe in the paranormal. In fact, I don't really believe it at all, but I do have a few stories that stick with me, that are unexplainable to my brain even years later with a more adult and reasonable thought process. The first that comes to mind is one I always tell my friends, that gives me chills and freaks me out and will always make me feel some type of way for the foreseeable future. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time and my dad was in the military. We were stationed in Fort Knox and lived on base in a provided military apartment. I moved around a lot growing up and have plenty of superstitious family members. So at the time of being a child the fear of the supernatural always existed. I lived pretty normally and then I made a friend named Dylan. Hope he is doing well these days. One day, after school, his mom invited me over to their home. They also lived on base. Right away, entering that apartment, I felt very uneasy, or like someone was watching me. However, as the day went by I played with him and his little sister and things were normal. Nothing amiss, and so on his birthday I returned to his home for the final time. When I came through the door again I got that uneasy feeling. This time I asked him about it, and his demeanor changed as well as his little sister's. He didn't really want to talk about it. Being young I found that to be a bit strange. As his birthday went on I found myself needing to use the bathroom. There were 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went to enter the bathroom downstairs, and without a missed breath him and his sister both say, "We don't use that bathroom. Don't go in there." I didn't really think much of it until he asked if I would stand outside the door of the upstairs bathroom while he used it. Things now seemed off, and that uneasy feeling sank in. I complied. We went upstairs, he went to pee and left the door wide open and asked me not to let anyone shut it, which freaked me out because it was just me and him upstairs. I was dying to piss and asked if he would stand outside because now I was nervous, to which he refused. Angry that he didn't return the favor I stormed off downstairs, yanked the bathroom door open and meant to take a piss. Kind of funny, and it gets a little funnier and terrifying. 10 years old, pants halfway down, I'm about ready to piss when the lights go off. The switch is inside as well as the lock, which frightens me because now I can't see and I have my pants down. Then it flicks back on and then off again, and then it begins happening a lot more rapidly. What gives me chills is that to this day I distinctly remember seeing the light switch flip itself up and down on its own. This picks up. Now a terrified 9 or 10-year-old, I begin to panic and try to open the door. I got the door open at about a head's width and it slammed on me really hard. Lights are still flickering. I open it again and go to step out and it slams on me even harder. Now crying for his mom or anyone because the lights are flickering and the door is slamming on me. His mom hears me plea and is yanking on the door, to which I'm pushing. Finally, the door flung open and both her and I went falling forward at the force. I cried and went home. It really ruined me being friends with Dylan and we never talked about it. I remember later my mom asked if I remembered that story and told me his mother called and apologized. She also proceeded to tell my mom further that her and her husband had been experiencing a lot of things in the apartment. One being that she would wake up in the night to something raising the covers off of her husband and whispering his name. I don't believe in ghosts, but that is one of the most terrifying and unexplainable portions of my childhood and experience unlike any other. Edit. 2 others wanted to hear 2 of my other experiences. Not near as weird, but here is a link if interested.